There are still quite a few unanswered questions. Obviously, this building has a long history. It's over 260 years old, and a lot of times buildings change. When we started this project, we were really hoping to learn a lot of different things about the building because it looked quite a bit different than it does today. The building had been modified quite a bit. In 1924, the Methodist Women's Society purchased the building and renovated it from basically what it looked like from 1760 up until 1924. We're actually really lucky in the fact that we have some photographs from around the 1920s before the building had been renovated, and it actually shows what the building probably looked like in the 18th century. It hadn't really changed very much, at least the exterior of the building. And also an architect named Donald McDonald Miller was here in 1919, and he actually was really enamored with colonial buildings. So he came to Williamsburg, he saw this building, and he actually sketched it. So we actually have in our special collections at the Rockefeller Library, we found his little sketchbook that he used in 1919, and it shows things like floor plans and elevations and details about the chimney. And so we're actually really fortunate to have that and the photographs. What we don't have, though, is a lot of information on the interior of the building, and that's where we're using physical investigations to understand what the building looked like in the 18th century.
We look for the evidence, that comes in many forms, looking at the materials, the techniques used to build these buildings and understand what they looked like, how they were used. And a lot of that's looking at the technology of the time period.
We are restoring the Bray School. In historic preservation, there's a difference between restoration and reconstruction. For restoration, that really means going back to a specific time period for a building that you actually have. So this is a true restoration, and one that we haven't really done at Colonial Williamsburg since the 1960s. And so part of this process is that we are able to harness new technology that they didn't have during that last major restoration, which was Weatherburn's Tavern. So things like paint analysis and dendrochronology and using scanning electron microscopes. These are things that we actually can use now to better understand what the building looked like. Reconstruction, on the other hand, is when the building no longer exists. So it had been torn down or lost at some point in time, and you reconstruct it back to what it would have looked like, also in a specific time period, but you're starting from scratch. So you're using historic methods and putting it back, and there's a lot more guesswork in reconstructions than there are with restorations.
The original Bray School, it's what they would call a tenement in the 18th century, so it's a rental house. And what it would have looked like is the residential structure that the vast majority of Virginians lived in the 18th century. So this would have basically been the dominant residential home in Williamsburg. Unfortunately, these are also the buildings that get torn down to make way for progress because they're not the houses of the gentry, they're the houses of the average person. And so it had two primary rooms on the first floor, both with fireplaces. It had a central hall, or a central passage, what we would call. And then upstairs, the stairway goes upstairs. Again, two rooms upstairs as well, one on either side. And those are both heated as well. So that was living space in the 18th century.
To go back to the 18th century form, we had to do a process which is called deconstruction. So we don't call it demolition, it's deconstruction, and that's when we carefully strip back the layers. So taking out the plaster that was added in 1924, taking out the flooring that was added in 1924. And when we peeled back the layers, that's when we were actually finding some really interesting things that survived from the 18th century that we weren't expecting. Things like chair rail moldings, baseboard moldings. We actually found one original door and two original window sash. And the sash are what basically hold the panes of glass. We could see in the building that there were certain things that could be 18th century, but actually once we started the deconstruction process, finding these things was really enlightening for us because it really helps us put the building back to what it looked like in the 18th century.
Architectural preservation has taught us a little bit about Ann Wager and the students, and what the building really is it's a physical link to the past. It's where Ann Wager lived. It's where she taught. It's where the children were taught. This is the building that they saw a tremendous amount of time during their occupancy of the building. It probably saw this building more than any other.
There are still quite a few unanswered questions about this building. Unfortunately, it's been moved from its original site. In 1930, it moved from where it originally stood on Boundary Street to the campus of William and Mary. And at that time, we lost one of the chimneys plus the foundation and likely a cellar kitchen. Also, all of the outbuildings were long gone by the 20th century. Fortunately, our archaeologists have dug the site, and those foundations actually remain underneath Brown Hall, but they're in a very tricky situation and we don't have access to them right now. But hopefully in the future, historians and archaeologists will be able to look at those.
As far as the Bray School, it's yielded a tremendous amount of information, but there's always more to learn. And part of that process is identifying new technologies that can, answer those questions, but also constantly asking questions about the past, because we're always seeking those answers.